Hello everyone, factoring today's second video, so we're already on the 5-day forecast, so you can find the videos out here on the homepage. Just scroll down a bit and there's underneath the link ads. There's also a written version, you get to that via buttons at the top of the page. Going to be a transitional 5 days, starting cold, but ending up quite Atlantic driven. This video is going to pick up the story beyond 5 days as we look from sort of 5 to 10 days away, which takes us into February. It looks like the Atlantic's going to be giving us quite an unsettled spell of weather for the opening days of February, to say the least, but I'll talk you through everything that's going on in a moment. We'll start off looking at the latest developments with the stratosphere, but before I get on with that, just to say about the ads at Gaz Office, I've already mentioned the links to ads, so there's these articles on all pages. Have a browse through widgets and click through links. If there's any articles that interest you, help us pay for the website. Thanks very much for doing that. We'll start off with the current temperature at 30 HPA from the JMA. This is the Japanese Meteorological Agency. So this is the temperature at 30 HPA over the North Pole for the winter of 2016-2017. We start off over there in September, and this is where we are right now. The black line here is the temperatures at 30 HPA, which is one of the top layers of the stratosphere. It's not the highest layer, but it's one of the top layers of the stratosphere. And the grey line here is the trend line, so you can see that although the temperature at 30 HPA has ticked up a little bit over the past few days, we're still generally cooler than average at 30 HPA. If we go higher up to 10 HPA, this is how things are looking. It's a rather different story. Yes, the black line is still underneath the grey line, so we're still colder than average at 10 HPA, which is one of the top layers. That's getting towards the top layer of the stratosphere. The temperature there is still a little bit colder than average, but it is closer to the grey line than we see at 30 HPA, and we are now too far from trend. Now, what's going to happen over the next few days, particularly at the weekend, is that we're going to see this black line moving very dramatically and quickly upwards, doing something a bit like that. It'll be straighter, but I'm drawing it. How far up the chart we get that black line going to be very interesting. I think it's going to go quite a long way up. It won't go off the scale, but it's going to get quite a long way up, and we'll be able to see by the weekend just how much of a stratospheric warming we have. So these are the temperature, this is the temperature forecast from the GFS model for 10 HPA. Still cold there at the moment. We know it's still a bit colder than average. There's the North Pole showing that, yes, temperatures are still below average with those blue colours. We've got these yellow colours around the edges trying to move in. As we run through the next few days, again, it's the 27th that we get this big warming coming up. It's only a couple of days away now. It's been forecast from 384 hours away consistently, virtually every single run of the GFS. Amazing performances, and if only it was as reliable when forecasting the actual weather as it is the temperature in the stratosphere. But of course, when you get down to the troposphere, it's much more unreliable in terms of model forecasting. So it's easier for the model to forecast what's happening in the stratosphere than it is in the troposphere where weather is taking place. So there we are with those red colours anyway. The stratospheric warming is occurring on the 27th of January, and then that intensifies and moves in towards the pole. By the 29th, we see a major warming is taking place over the North Pole in the stratosphere at 10 HPA. That eased off a little bit for a day or two, but then we get a second go at it. We lift the temperature up again next week. This is the 1st of February when another stratospheric warming is taking place. Those red colours again pushing in towards the top of the pole. So that does look very significant at 10 HPA. This is how the ECMWF is seeing things. This is the stratospheric forecast again for 10 HPA on the 28th of January. Again, we see those red colours are there across Siberia, penetrating into pole. The cross there, they helpfully show you where the actual North Pole is. So that is the North Pole where we've got that cross just there. So that's on the 28th of January. As we move through to the 31st of January, you see that very significant warming still taking place at 10 HPA, and it's still there though, leveling off a little bit as we go through to the start of February. So several days of sustained warm temperatures at 10 HPA. To see whether this is affecting the lower levels of the atmosphere though, we have to go lower down. So if we go back to 30 HPA, this is how things are looking at 30 HPA in the stratosphere on the 30th of January, when this stratospheric warming is taking place at 10 HPA. We don't really see much sign of it at 30 HPA. It still looks quite cold then, but it does take a few days to move down into the lower layers of the stratosphere, and then eventually, if we want to get blocking, to get into the troposphere. So this is how things look on the 1st of February. Temperatures are lifting up there. Nowhere near as warm as it is at 10 HPA, but we are getting some warming coming down to 30 HPA. And as we go through to the 3rd of February, which is 240 hours away, day 10, we find that, yes, a fairly substantial warming has taken place. Again, we haven't reached the level that we do at 10 HPA, but that does look like a fairly significant warming taking place at 30 HPA. And actually, the model is showing that the zonal winds at 1 HPA, which is the very far top layer of the stratosphere, that's as far as you can go with the stratosphere. We see a reversal of the zonal winds is beginning to be forecast by the ECMWF model. So this chart shows wind and fluxes for the winter of 2016, 2017. You notice from this part of the chart just here that we've had a fairly strong zonal wind through the course of this winter, averaging up here somewhere. This is where we started off, by the way, back in the early part of the winter and into November, when zonal winds were much weaker. But through the main part of winter, December, January, we see we had quite a strong zonal wind. Now, this black line at the end shows a dramatic plunge in the zonal westerlies, the zonal wind, at 1 HPA as we go through into the forecast part. So this is where it is right now, and the forecast is to crash as we get into the start of February. So that does look quite significant. It's very, very close, probably is a technical sudden stratospheric warming, because a sudden stratospheric warming will reverse the zonal winds and turn them from westerlies to easterlies, and that's the kind of thing that the ECMWF is forecasting. I'm not sure the GFS is there, but the ECMWF, I think, is going for a technical sudden stratospheric warming at the moment. If this does happen, if we do see the zonal wind collapsing like that, we will probably find blocking resulting somewhere over the North Pole in around 2 or 3 weeks' time. And of course, blocking is the route to get colder out of the pole into mid latitudes. But whether that blocking gets to us, whether it's on the right side of the pole to bring cold to us, is the big unknown, and we won't be able to forecast that until the actual blocking begins to set up. We'll be keeping an eye on the stratospheric warming as we close in on it over the next 2 or 3 days. These are the GFS temperature and precipitation ensembles for the next 2 weeks. The red line here is the 30-year temperature average. Looks like we're above average at the moment in terms of the upper air temperatures, but you're going to have a really cold day tomorrow, biting southerly wind. If you want to know more about that, check out 5-day forecast. Over the weekend, we go properly milder than average, both in the upper air temperatures and down on the surface. Into the weekend, particularly into next week, going to go milder than average, and then we keep it mild and average through into the start of February. This is the start of February just here. The main thing, though, more than the temperatures, I think, is the dramatic shift that's taking place with rainfall, because it's had it really, really dry this winter. November, December, January, all coming out drier than average. And actually going back before that to October and September and to August, again, very significantly drier than average months, probably July as well. I think our last wetter than average month may have been June. So we've had a long run of dry weather, but it looks like, I wouldn't necessarily say February's going to be a wet month overall, but it looks like for the start of February anyway, the rain is really coming back. Some very big precipitation spikes there, showing a dramatic change to much wetter conditions starting at the weekend, but particularly coming through next week. The model might be going over the top with that, but been fairly well forecast this by the GFS ensembles to turn significantly wetter for the start of September. So this is how things are looking on Monday then. This is when we end the 5-day forecast, and we've got a little ridge up to the northeast, but this low pressure out in the Atlantic is bringing wet and windy weather in on Monday next week, and then that settles us into a proper unsettled spell through next week. Low pressure racing in off the Atlantic, quite tightly packed isobars, so not only wet but also windy with risk of gales in some western parts of the country. And this continues up to day 10, which is Saturday 4th of February, when low pressure is still driving in off the Atlantic, still bringing wet and windy weather for the first weekend of September. The wind is coming from the central Atlantic, so not particularly cold. The ECWF looking like this, and again we've got that ridge up to the northeast on Monday, but low pressure is trying to come in off the Atlantic. That gives us a wet and windy day on Tuesday, and then more low pressure is moving in from the south and the west through the latter part of next week, so that again looks very unsettled. Pressure is really low now at 985 to 80 millibars across most parts of the country, so very low pressure, bringing lots of heavy rain and quite strong winds too for the second half of next week. We go up to day 10, which is Saturday 4th of February. Again, low pressure still driving in off the Atlantic, still looking pretty wet. It is coming up against a blocking, or partly a blocking ridge over Scandinavia as well, so that would be delaying the progress of weather fronts, and that just adds to the wet theme really. If the weather front's coming up against a ridge to the east and grinding to a halt, then you could get some really quite impressive rainfall totals indeed. And finally, the GEM, again we find that we've got this ridge up to the north on Monday, but low pressure is gathering out to the west. These low pressures, though, are on a more southerly track with the GEM. So the middle part of next week, we find a bit of a stall occurring out to the west of us. The ridge up to the northeast looks strong. This kind of thing the ECWF was going for yesterday, but it's dropped the idea this morning. But what eventually happens with the GEM is that a ridge gets in over Scandinavia and starts to strengthen and pushes this low pressure southwards. So we finish up on day 10, Saturday 4th of February, looking like we're pulling in an easterly wind, or about to pull in an easterly wind. We have got a proper ridge there over Scandinavia, and it looks like the wind's trying to get round into the east. The GEM is always very different, and it isn't supported by the other two, but the ECWF was actually going for that kind of scenario yesterday, albeit it has dropped its operational run today, but I think there are still options within the ECWF ensembles that are going a bit like that. So we're certainly going to be turning it much more unsettled into next week. And I think could be some really quite wet weather indeed at times through the course of next week. Now, whether this is going to go like the GEM and it might eventually fizzle out and turn cold, or whether it's the Atlantic really locking in for several days, as the GFS suggests, we've got to wait and see. I suspect it might be the Atlantic really having a go for a few days. But let's wait and see how things are looking as we get through to the second half of the week. Certainly it's going to be turning a lot more unsettled, can say that, next week. Right, that's all for now. Thanks for watching.